Welcome to Good Morning Cape Town. We are talking the politics of youth, our roundtable debate between members of the ANC, DA, EFF, IFP and Rise. Mzansi will be debating the issues that affect the 10 million young people in this country between the ages of 15 and 24 years old. We are at the UCT Upper Campus, where later in our program we'll be joined by student representatives talking about the issues that affect them here and broadly. Out of the 10 million young people in South Africa between the ages of 15 and 24 years old, 3.5 million of them are not employed or not in any form of education or training. That number is enough to fill Africa's biggest arena, the F&B Stadium, 36 times. There's an argument that elections are not for the now, but for the future. The outcome of this election will have an impact on those 10 million South Africans. I will give you each an opportunity to open up with an opening statement of 90 seconds at most. After that, we have standardized questions which we'll ask all political parties, and you will all have an opportunity to respond in 90 seconds. Thank you so much for joining us. Lucian, what is your opening statement on the state of youth and education in South Africa?
Good morning, and thank you for hosting me here. My name is Lucian Davids. As you've introduced, the Provincial Convener of the ANC Youth League. And for ourselves as the ANC, we would like to say that, the educational system within South Africa, is functional. It's very functional. The issues that we are obviously identifying and seeing is that there is a struggle to absorb many of the graduates that we do produce within our country. So above and beyond that, it's not that we have an issue with creating skilled workers, because many of them happen to either go abroad or be here within the country but not find employment. So, these are some of the challenges that we as the ANC are working on. But it would be a stark contradiction to say that within the city, as the ANC has not done anything in terms of, helping and aiding students. I'm sure that the panelists that are here with me can agree or attest to the fact that they are beneficiaries, like myself, of the systems created by the ANC. I'm not saying that we are perfect in any way, but the approach to solving any problems countries, is always multifaceted, and it takes for an inclusive take from all sectors of society to work together in order to make sure that ourselves as young people, we have a say in what happens in our country. That is why ultimately our ancestors fought for this democracy that we have today, because prior to this we were mainly excluded from joining the corridors of governance, corridors of education, have access to decent healthcare, and in fact have the ability to study, because various barriers were put up mainly. So from my side, that is what an opening statement.
That ding that you hear is your cue to wrap up.
Morning to your listeners. So the main campaign message for the EFF in these provincial and national elections is our land and jobs now, stop load shedding. So I guess the two main things that young people are faced with in this country is perpetual joblessness and unemployment, and also the lack of access to education. So quality education in South Africa remains a commodity which is reserved for those with financial capacity. So if we take higher education, for example, in this country, higher education remains a privilege for a few, with less than 5% of the youth population being registered in institutions of higher learning, such as this one that we're sitting in today. So the reality, it means that in this country, education is a tool that is continuously used to deepen the class contradiction as well as maintain racially organized socioeconomic inequality. So as the EFF, our solution to this is that we need to provide access to free, quality and decolonized education. And then we get into the second issue, which is the issue of jobs, right? So as of 2023, the unemployment rate stood at like 42%, which means that a rough sum of 15 million people in the country, which includes the youth, are excluded from meaningfully participating in the economy, right? So the only way in which we can produce jobs in this country and root out this chronic unemployment and deep inequality and also massive poverty is to build, one, state capacity, and also to build protected industries, right? So basically, we must have a state that is able to produce goods and services that are locally beneficiated in order to create jobs.
Let's go to Gillian Bosman, your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Lester, and good morning to you and all the listeners. As you said, my name is Gillian Bosman. I'm a DA public rep in the provincial legislature and also constituency head for Oostenburg South 2 in the Metro Southeast. Lester, the current education system failed to provide quality education for all. And what we in the DA recognize is that this leads to a cycle of poverty and limited opportunities for young people across South Africa. We know that the lack of foundational skills in reading, writing and numeracy hinders the ability of young people to succeed in making it to higher education institutions such as UCT or to TVET colleges. And what we envisioned as a party, not just in the Western Cape, but across South Africa, is for young people in South Africa that are empowered, young people that are supported and equipped to reach their full potential. We've shown through our business case in this province that we can do that through education and skills development, through job creation and economic opportunities, through youth empowerment and participation and actively getting young people to participate in their futures, whether that's through the Children's Commission or through the multiple youth programs we've got running in this province. And we also focus on the health and well-being of young people, because we know that young people are traumatized at the state of South Africa and traumatized at the state of where they find themselves. And I think what's most important as well, we need to be able to create an environment where young people are safe and secure and where they feel safe and secure. So as the party, our vision overall for youth in South Africa is a South Africa where young people are empowered, have opportunities and live in an inclusive society.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Sanele Zondo now, IFP MP and chairperson of the IFP's Youth Brigade.
Thanks. My name is Senator Zondo, as you just said. It is an arguable fact that the state of education in South Africa is nothing but a national crisis. Our schools were once a beacon of hope and opportunity. We have become a battleground for inequality and injustice. The promise of freedom and prosperity that accompanied the dawn of our democracy in 1994 have been betrayed by the system that fails our youth on a daily basis. The current state of education system is crumbling and is faced with various crises. Our youth is denied an access to quality education due to systematic challenges rooted in corruption and poverty and lack of infrastructure and inequality distribution of resources. As Inkatha Freedom Party, we refuse to accept the status quo. We refuse to be blind-eyed and allow the hope and dream of our youth to be dashed against the rock of inequality. We refuse to let the legacy of corruption be the current government to continue to haunt our future and detect the failed and wasteful of our young children. As the IFP, we pledge for a radical vision for the future of education in South Africa, a vision rooted in justice, equality and opportunity for all, a vision that dares to imagine the world where every child, regardless of their background and circumstances, getting access to a better education.
And now let's go to Akolile Notuwala of Rise Mzansi, your opening remarks.
Thank you, Lester. Good morning to you and your listeners. I think the one thing that we should, where we should begin is that young people do not start their lives at 15. We know in South Africa they are failed from the age of 1 up until the age of 35 when they're part of the youth. And so it is those underlying systemic and structural issues that we should resolve for young people. We need to create an enabling environment for young people to be able to thrive before they begin to be in university. And I think even in relation to education, and I think we must give props and thank the leaders who were part of Fees Must Fall. They did highlight many of the issues in universities, but you still have children falling in pit latrines. You still have children being shot at in school and outside of school, in Mitchell's Plain and in Athlone. And so that doesn't create an enabling environment. And hence, yesterday, I launched the Bridge Western Cape Plan, because the inequalities in this province, inequalities across the country, but they are very stark in this province. There are children who live in this province who are thriving and who thrive, who become what they want to be, but we know that there are children who do not get those opportunities.
Let's go into the numbers now. The numbers, but also the sentiment. Sanele, I'll start with you. According to Stats.SA, the youth, as noted as 15 to 34, remain vulnerable in the job market in the fourth quarter of 2023. The results show that the number of unemployed youth increased to 5.9 million. Stats.SA says many have been discouraged from either looking for employment opportunities or training because of a lack of hope. How does the IFP promise to bring hope back to South African youth? 60 seconds.
Thanks. I think, first of all, the manifesto of the IFP emphasized that as the IFP, if you get into power, we will make sure that every graduate got a stipend of 3,000 rand to make sure that is able to go out and continue life, to bridge that gap of being unemployed and being a graduate. You know, we have many graduates who have been frustrated and other committed suicide, other being depressed, admitted to hospitals, and want to bring hope to say that they have something to start up and will also, our manifesto stated that we'll have the community work whereby graduates will be fielded in some spaces, in either private or public sector, so that on their field, so that they will keep on getting the required skill and keep up with their educational field.
Gillian Bosman of the Democratic Alliance, why is there a hope deficit?
I think there's a hope deficit because our young people have been failed. Lester, you would have seen the same social clip that we all saw when a young lady told the president the other day that she's got a degree in communications, and the president said, keep looking. In the Western Cape, we've told young people, you don't have to just keep looking, but the government will assist you. And as a Democratic Alliance, we will continue to expand those type of programs such as the SMME Booster Fund in the province that have assisted over 950 small businesses, many of them young businesses. That sustains 4,977 jobs, but also showing young people, especially those young people who are youth at risk, that you can benefit from government programs such as the Chrysalis Academy, where young people from across this province, rural and urban as well as peri-urban, are able to come to a program on a 3 or 6 month program where they are developed as holistic young people, as individuals, and they are given the skills to be able to go out into their communities and not just act as ambassadors for social change, but also to do an internship that allows them to move into formal employment at some point.
Inam from the EFF.
Yeah, sure, Lester. So I think similarly to the IFP, the EFF proposes for a job-seeking allowance, first of all. We know that it's difficult for any young person who comes from a disadvantaged community to be able to find employment. So when it comes to things as transport and data and all of those things which are required to get jobs, that requires resources. So we're saying as the EFF that there must be a job-seeking allowance, and also there must be an allowance for graduates, right? So we know that in this country we find situations where graduates, even in scarce skills industries such as engineering and the built environment, find themselves outside of the employment market. So we're saying that we need to restore the dignity of these people by ensuring that we have an allowance for them whilst they're sitting at home and waiting or looking for employment. But most importantly, I think that
Akbalili Notiwala of Rise Mzansi.
Thank you, Lester. I think we must not only give hope to those who are in institutions such as the University of Cape Town. We need to emphasize that FET colleges are important, and FET college provide young people with skills. They provide young people who fall through the cracks, who do not get to make it to matric. We know that we have high rates of dropouts. And we need to take care of those dropouts, because those dropouts are the ones that get easily attracted to gang and crime. And Rise Mzansi wants to launch a national public program where not only graduates from universities or AFET colleges, but also those who are unemployed, who have been dropouts, can get some skills. A year-long program where they can get some training and skills and be provided with a stipend. And we have said that we want to introduce a job seekers grant as well.
Lucian Davids of the ANC.
Thank you. Delivering hope to young people within our country, especially within the education space, just means for the ANC to expand on the work that it's doing. You'd understand that recently the Solpalaiki University has been, finished. Students have been, enrolled to it and working from there. So for the ANC, we would also need to expand within the TVET sector, with the expansion of more colleges and getting young people to enroll there, because as the former speaker, Mr. Notiwala, had mentioned, that is where young people need to be absorbed more so for the manufacturing sector to expand our economy in that line.
In 2023, Gillian, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme funded 1.3 million students for that academic year. Between 2023 and 2024, National Treasury cut by as much as 10% the money allocated to NFSAS. This year, only 1.2 million students are provisionally funded. What will your party do to ensure students receive their tuition accommodation allowance without the corruption and mismanagement that we've seen at NFSAS?
Well, firstly, Lester, I think we need to realize that the higher education funding model is not just NFSAS. The higher education funding model is a holistic model in terms of how we fund universities as well and how we plan for higher education. And that includes how we plan for the TVET sector specifically as well, because ultimately it's not just about getting young people to UCT. Some of us are lucky that we were able to attend UCT, but we are in a small minority. There are many young people that I know, that communities that I grew up with, that cannot come to university. There needs to be alternative paths as well. So what we focused on, and we've presented in our manifesto, our alternative model for NFSAS, is looking at how do you manage affordability, to look at the different funding options available, but not just making higher education more affordable, but then again also making it more accessible. And one of the first things we will look at is how do you stop these constant cuts from National Treasury, because those cuts impact what happens in education, those cuts impact what happens in communities. Because even if someone can afford to get to university, being able to take a taxi here is still one of those things.
Inam, very quickly, your 60 seconds from the EFF.
Yeah, Lester, so I think it's very simple from us as the EFF. Enshrined in our 7 cardinal pillars, we're proposing for free quality decolonized education. It's as simple as that. We're saying that the education system must no longer be commodified, and we're saying that it must be compulsory for everyone to access and have a post-secondary education for everyone. So this includes universities of technology, and also TVETs. So what we need to do after that is that we also need to cancel student debts, right? Because we find that a lot of people still have debts from NFSAS, and also we need to reintegrate financially excluded students. So what in the main we were calling for in the fees must fall era, or as the fees must fall generation, is to say that there must be free quality education and that we must decommodify the education system. Thanks.
Dakolili Notiwala, what will Rise Mzansi do to ensure students receive a tuition accommodation allowance without corruption and mismanagement?
Thank you, Lester. So there are 2 very important things that we have to deal with and that we talk about dealing with. Number 1 is corruption. We want not anyone in the country, not young people, will be able to fulfill their lives and lead dignified and happy lives while we still have corrupt leaders within particularly the governing party in the country. And we need to remove Blade Nzimande. He has led a department that has failed. He has presided over corruption, and he needs to go. Second, in relation to that, is we have a deficit in leadership. And hence, Rise Mzansi keeps on saying that we need new leaders. And leadership is not just in terms of party leaders, but also management of NFSAS. NFSAS has been mismanaged, and that's why you have many of these mistakes. They call them mistakes. And it's part of the corrupt activities of money going to people that it should not be going to.
Lucian Davids of the ANC.
Minister Blade Nzimande has dissolved the NFSAS board. And that's one step towards, making sure that we make sure that the NFSAS will be running functionally, looking for a leadership that is going to be able to manage NFSAS properly. Beyond that, we must also understand that most of the money, though there is made mention of corruption within the state, we also need to take into account the fact that there are many of the private institutions, especially these residences, that's been asking exorbitant amounts of money from, government in order to house students, and that in itself is crippling the work of NFSAS, to effectively make sure that students, have money at least towards education. More students could have been funded, but there are some illicit activities taking place within the private sector when it comes to, obtaining government funds.
While South Africa has made significant progress in ensuring the right to education, that we only have 55% of first graders. 55% of first graders will never end up writing their senior certificate examination. What do we do to ensure that those who start in grade 1 end up completing at least 10 years up until grade 10 of schooling? Hopefully, they'll reach matric.
Okay, so when we speak about free, quality and decolonized education, we're not speaking about just higher education. We're saying that from basic education and from as 3 years old, basically this needs to be the case. So from early childhood development, there needs to be access to early childhood development programs for children, and these programs need to be facilitated by trained ECD workers that are, given adequate salaries. And then when we come to basic education, we need to also ensure that not only the content is quality, but also the infrastructure. So we cannot have a situation where in 2023 and in 2024 we still have mud schools in rural Eastern Cape. We still have schools that are built out of asbestos, or even that there's still pit latrines in these cases. So I read an article just the other day that a young child actually passed away from drowning in a pit latrine. So this shouldn't be the case in this day and age.
At Kolele, how do we make more than 45% of learners who start in grade 1 actually finish a schooling career?
So it doesn't start in grade 1. It starts before they get into grade 1. It starts in making sure that everyone has access to early childhood development. And when we talk about bridging the divide, we mean that there are children who are able to have breakfast, nutritious breakfast in the morning, and therefore they go to whether ECD or primary school, and they are able to concentrate and they are able to succeed. We have a food and hunger problem in South Africa, and if we don't deal with hunger, we will fail each and every child in South Africa. We have multiple children who are suffering from malnutrition. And when that happens, that means they are not going to be able to succeed in school. We also need to deal with this issue of substance abuse in our communities. Because of so many structural failures, of so many systemic failures, it's very easy for young people to be involved in substance. Those are issues that we need to deal with before they get into the school fields.
Time is up. Lucian Davids.
As mentioned before, what we need to do as the ANC is seriously work on expanding the work that we have. More importantly is developing the economy, and of our priorities within the ANC manifesto is exactly making sure that we'll be, expanding job facilitations, making sure that businesses are thriving. As you could see, probably Minister Stella Ndebeni-Abrams, who's also the Minister for Small Business Development in South Africa, has been moving quite swiftly within the sector, making sure, that businesses are being developed, making sure that young people do get access to opening small businesses. The NYDA has also been supporting towards this end. So what we are saying is these interventions in the main will also help people in the community uplift themselves, so as to make sure that those children, those 45%, will definitely increase to a bigger percentage, because there's now sustainability within these communities.
60 seconds is up. Let's go to the IFP's Sanele Zondo.
First of all, South Africa has a lucky that is structured through the federal states. If you are talking about national, province, district and local government. First of all, as the IFP, we promote federalism, and we plead that government should give all the spheres powers to determine and regulate and make regulation that fits for their areas, because you find that there is a blanket approach in terms of policies and regulations which are not fitting to some areas, to make sure that we promote education in an early stage, and we make sure that it's fit for those areas to keep learners at school. Why I'm saying so? It's because there are challenges that are faced with Western Cape that are not faced with Gauteng. So we need Western Cape to deal with their challenges and have regulation that talk to their needs, and that will promote the learning culture in the province. So I think that is what needs to be done, so that we'll deal direct with the question that you have posed.
We'll give you extra 60 seconds to answer about NFSAS. But Gillian Bosman of the Democratic Alliance.
I think, Lester, for us, we've shown in the Western Cape that the focus needs to be on quality education for every child in every classroom. And in the Western Cape, we introduced values-based education 5 years ago, where young people in the Western Cape going to schools across this province, the focus is on time on task, making sure that young people from early childhood development right up until matric are provided with the opportunities to develop themselves, and not just focused on what's happening in matric. In the Western Cape, for instance, of the 50,520 candidates who passed met the requirement to get into higher education. Nationally, the focus was on what is the matric pass rate, but in the Western Cape, the focus was on what is it that we need to put into that recipe to ensure that someone who starts at an ECD center in Langa or in Grassy Park is able to end up either at a university or at a TVET college or in a job. Because ultimately we know education is a multifaceted problem, and we've had an opportunity to fix that, and the ANC's failed, and we saw that with the Bella Bill as well. They failed to provide a holistic approach to dealing with education.
What does the IFP intend to do to fix NFSAS and the program of financial aid?
No, thanks. It's a given that as the IFP, I've been calling, because I serve in that portfolio for education, I've started a long time ago to call for the removal of the Minister, Dr. Blade Nzimande, because you can, in fact, disband every structure below him, but the problem is not structures below him, it's him. Even the other bodies that can be fixed in NFSAS will fail to work under his leadership. So he's the one who's got the problem. I've been saying that long time ago, before even the fire Andile as the CEO. I think on the NFSAS we need to take it back to the institutions, so that the administration part of it can be able to be transparent and be accessible, because under the NFSAS, under the direct payment, we had the problems. When it comes to this pay cut, the government should be serious. We can't compromise education, because education is the basic and the background of the future. So that is where we need to build the future of this country.
Quick spot questions before we go to a break, and then Eyewitness News. Now from the EFF. Education already takes up 17% of South Africa's national budget. The EFF is calling for universal education from ECD, primary, high school and tertiary. Who is paying for that? How is South Africa paying for universal education all the way into tertiary level?
So, Lester, what we speak about in the EFF is nationalization of the strategic sectors and commanding heights. So, essentially, what needs to happen is that we need to nationalize things such as mines, banks and other strategic sectors in order to be able to fund these things. And then from this, we'll be able to industrialize the economy, which means that we also need to give incentives to different industries to be able to then make growth in the economy and be able to fund this free education. So essentially, the state needs to lead state-led programs that will be able to ensure that there's industrialization to support the free education that we speak about.
Will this include private education as well? Because there's a listener here that says, I'm appealing to NFSAS to fund children at private colleges too. I have a niece who couldn't get into a public university, mainly due to space, so she's forced to attend a private institution. Will the EFF cover private tuition as well?
So, as the EFF, we don't believe in private versus public institution. There must be one education system for all. So, we'll find that there will not be a case of the IEP and NSC system. So, there needs to be quality education that is provided by the government, and this will also be funded by the government. So, there will not be any private education when it comes to the EFF government.
Spot question to Gillian Bosman of the Democratic Alliance. Does the Democratic Alliance only care about holistic education, that the matric pass rate is not that a big deal when the Western Cape has not been the top performing province in South Africa over the last, 3 or 4 years? Is that when the DA decides matric pass rate is not such a big deal?
No, Lester, I think what we need to look at is, and I said earlier, education reform is a long-term project, and the gains that we're seeing in the Western Cape at the moment in terms of quality education in every classroom for every child is a project that started years ago. It's not something that started yesterday or something that started in 2019 when this administration came into effect. The Western Cape and the people of the Western Cape inherited a government that was broken under the African National Congress, and you'll remember the shenanigans around the multiple premiers that we had, and they failed to focus on teacher development, they failed to focus on early childhood development, and they failed to focus on the actual pedagogy of learning, and those things cost money. And you asked the previous announcement from the EFF around how are we going to fund these things. At the moment, we know South Africa is broke. Our government is borrowing at an alarming rate, and when it comes to investing in education, the government is the first to go and negotiate a national wage agreement for teachers when the national government under Minister Angie Motshekga doesn't employ a single teacher. All of those teachers are employed at a provincial level, and that money has to come from national equitable share and the money from provinces.
We go to the spot questions now to our panelists. Lucian Davids of the ANC is the provincial convener of the ANC Youth League. Lucian, the Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, recently revealed in a written parliamentary reply that there are currently 31,000 teacher vacancies in South Africa. It's blamed largely on a budget that is shrinking, a budget that has shrunk under an ANC government over the last 30 years. Should the ANC take accountability for a 31,000 vacancy list for teachers in South Africa?
Well, thank you, Lester. The answer is quite simple. Of course, we need to take accountability for the fact that there is that vacancy. However, we must understand that there's this thing, called austerity, and it was made mention by Gillian. The budget cut issue, its actual term is called austerity, and because of that, the economy is shrinking.
The president of the ANC in this country, Cyril Ramaphosa, the Minister of Finance, whether it be Ino Godongwana or the previous minister, Tito Mboweni, has refused to mention the A word. They have not officially announced that South Africa is in a period of austerity, but quite clearly we are. Why won't the ANC acknowledge that?
We're looking for definite ways within expanding the economy to make sure that we can fight back against austerity, because it's not mainly a thing that is particular to South Africa, right? It is a phenomenon that takes place, around the world, that has market systems in place mainly.
Sanela, I want you to respond to Lucian there. That austerity, which this government has not officially recognized, is impacting on public services, particularly health, education, the future of South Africa's youth. Sanele?
For them to not acknowledge that, it's a sign that shows that they don't see what they are putting us through. Because if you're in government, if you're in control, you have to admit where you're not done enough. And you have to put measures. ANC has failed dismally to put measures to cap and give us hope that in the near future we'll take up the road up to say there's a light at the end of the tunnel. No, so I think we need a new government. The president has failed. The ministers have failed. I think for that matter, they've been on those positions for a longest time now. It's almost for 3 terms as a minister of basic education and all these ministers. We need change. If people can vote for another party or parties to combine and work, I think the party is the future, because if one person has the arrogance of numbers, he will take decisions that are not in favor of the people.
Actually, only 7% of adults have tertiary education qualifications in South Africa. The statistics is shocking when it comes to those who have graduated finding access into the job market. What is Rise Mzansi's plan?
So, I mean, as I said, young people have failed across the board in South Africa, whether you're a graduate, whether you're not a graduate, whether you're in school, whether you're outside of school. The ruling party in terms of higher education, and the governing party even here has a responsibility in terms of basic education, because there is a shared function within the province of the Western Cape. I do want to say it is a concern. Hearing the IFP talking about federalism, there seems to be conversations in the multi-party charter about the scramble for South Africa, because if you look at the DA, they want the Western Cape, the IFP wants KZN, and probably Action SA wants Gauteng, and that's a problem. We cannot continue to colonize now provinces within South Africa, and we must call that out. We are a South Africa that should be led by one government, and we should call that out.
Gillian Bosman of the Democratic Alliance, there was a report released by Youth Progressors which mentioned many factors that see Western Cape children, youth, leading better lives than the rest of the country. At 58%, the Western Cape has the lowest percentage of school-going children who depend on school nutrition. Water and sanitation plays a very, very important part of households. The Western Cape is a top performer in environmental quality, which leads to a better quality of life. But Stats SA says that a component that affects the livelihoods and the quality of life of young people is the shelter component. And the Western Cape performs relatively poorly when it comes to shelter. And that the finding by Stats SA says that this is driven by the fact that almost 19% of households in the Western Cape are classified as informal dwellings in this province. How is that affecting the quality of life of the young people that live in this province?
I think we all know that South Africa has a massive housing crisis, and I want to take it back to the point that Lucian made around austerity. It's easy to say that austerity is a global phenomenon, but austerity is also a government implemented tool to manage bad decisions that government has made. And we know that we are currently suffering directly from the decisions made during the Zuma administration, the Mbeki administration, and the Mandela administration around the types of macroeconomic policies that were put in place for South Africa. The housing crisis in the Western Cape is a crisis that mirrors itself across the country. And because of apartheid spatial planning, we are still dealing with where people live and how far they live from the opportunities. The focus in the Western Cape, and the reason why more young people in the Western Cape are better off than other young people in other provinces, is because we've continued to spend more per capita on young people than other provinces. We've continued to make sure that young people have a voice, and whether that is through our youth programs or through our Commissioner for Children in the Western Cape.
Let me challenge you there. A 600,000 long list in a housing backlog in the Western Cape. You've mentioned various ANC administrations nationally, but this is a province that the Democratic Alliance has been government here for the last 15 years, but still a 600,000 long waiting list for housing.
I think, Lester, maybe the first thing we have to debunk as well is to talk about what the housing waiting list is. It's not a waiting list. It's not a list of people who are queued 1 to 600,000. It's a database of people looking for housing opportunities. What we've done in the Western Cape is we've shown that we can use the grant framework that exists nationally, because the money has to come from national, and we can cut that into different programs, whether that is using the finance-linked subsidy program to provide a program where first-time home buyers can buy homes by getting support from government through perhaps helping with a bond application and paying the deposit, or whether that is rent to buy, a very successful pilot we've seen in the Cape Agulhas municipality, but also the current mayor of Cape Town and the MACO member for human settlements, Carl Popheim, has committed to accelerating inner-city social housing and ensuring that we get young people older people and communities who want to be closer to where they live and work to be.
Inam from the Economic Freedom Fighters, several questions on our WhatsApp line is, what do you mean? What is decolonized education in South Africa?
Before we get to the issue of decolonized education, because I think that's widely spoken about and we don't need to get into that, but I just want
There
to...
are many of our listeners who do not know what decolonized education is.
But I just want to go back to what Gillian is saying about these programs. I'm from Gugulethu and I haven't seen these programs being enacted in our communities. And also the reality is that the economic cores are in the city center and we don't have access to that as the black and colored youth. So in 2012, the DA adopted a densification policy which speaks to densifying the city center and also diversifying the city center. So when we look at things such as apartheid spatial planning, they're still permeable in the city of Cape Town. So when we speak about a curfew, there's an unspoken curfew in the city of Cape Town. We see black and colored people coming into the city center in the mornings, and then in the afternoons they have to go out because there is no access to social housing. Since the turn of the democracy, there hasn't been a single social housing project that the DA has done in the city centers or the economic cores.
I need you to get to that question that our listeners have asked. What is your definition of decolonized education in South Africa?
It's a simple one. So decolonized education is an education system that is modeled in the context of Africa, that comes with solutions by Africans for Africans, or even if we stretch it further to the global south. So essentially it's an education system that is modeled by us for us.
Good morning, it's Greg speaking to the young EFF lady. Education has gone private because government cannot supply a decent education to anyone anymore. It's only getting worse. So if you want to take away private education, then you're going to see this country fall even faster than taking away their ports, because there will simply be people who are illiterate everywhere and unemployable. Thanks, bye.
Could you respond to that message?
I mean, I think that even if you look at the structures of the EFF, education is something that is very important to us. If you look at the leadership of the EFF, it's quite an educated leadership. So education is something that we prioritize. Just because the ANC government has failed to provide quality education does not mean that we as the EFF would also fail to do the same thing. We prioritize education. We're saying that we must have quality education, and that starts from early childhood development programs to basic education, all the way up until higher education. We're also saying that we want to provide scholarships to people in higher education, both in South Africa and abroad, because we want to have the best of the best in terms of education in the country.
Quickly to Lucian Davids of the ANC. According to the 2019 Stats SA report on internet captivity, 10% of South African homes had internet access. 16% of South African youth had access at internet cafes or educational institutions. 64% of South African youth had access to internet connectivity on their phones. What's your party's plan to ensure that there is internet access to young people, that they can remain connected in an interconnected world and a digital economy, Lucian?
Well, firstly, there has been talks around, obviously, the embracing of the fourth industrial revolution in South Africa. So the ANC, would be developing plans, to make sure that more, programs that's coming in through the development of or rather the increasing of the capacity to make sure that young people, are able to access these very crucial digital tools, whether it be at their libraries, whether it be at schools through their, what back then would have been called the Kanya classes, making sure that students have access to the internet and computers to make sure that they are able to use the internet and apply to universities and so forth.
Akoleli, as part of Rise Mzansi's manifesto, you also say that aspects of the curriculum should be Africa-centered. What does that mean?
So it means that you have many South Africans who do not understand the African history because we are an African country, and we need to understand where we are from where we've come from. But also we take it further to say it's not only just that. We need to get civic education in school, in primary school, in high schools, so that you have young people being able to talk about these things themselves because they've studied them, they've learned them in school. When we talk about needing new leaders, we also say that we need young people to understand the South African Constitution, to understand the Bill of Rights. It would be amazing to have a high schooler as part of this conversation, but many of them wouldn't understand these things because they are not being taught in high school.
For the record, we've approached high schools to send learners who may not even be registered to vote because they may not even qualify in terms of age, but we wanted them to be part of a process because elections aren't for the present, it's for the future. Schools have politely declined, saying they would want learners as part of national policy, not to engage in party political, but I thought it would have been important for younger people to be involved in this conversation. Gillian?
If I could maybe ask, what aspects of the curriculum are not African-centered at the moment? And I'm asking purely as a former academic publisher who helped put some of those books together. What aspects of the curriculum does not include active citizenship education? Because I've worked with young people, and on Saturday I held a workshop in Makassar for young people, high school students, who are very engaged. They understand what the challenges are in their communities, and the governance structures for youth, especially in this province, and I think nationally through the Children's Parliament, show us that we've got very committed and very engaged young people who understand, I think better than most adults, what the contemporary issues are and how they want to shape their futures. In the Western Cape, through the Commissioner for Children, we regularly have those type of
Let's
engagement.
wrap up this question so that Akpalila could answer, and then I'll go to Sanele.
So it's the aspect where when you get to high school you have to choose between history or other subjects. I was a mathematics student. I studied mechanical engineering post high school. I only got involved in politics and got to understand politics and got to understand South Africa and the Constitution through my own activism. Had I never been involved in the Social Justice Coalition, I would not be here today. It is those aspects where we need to understand where we come from as a country, as a continent, in terms of our basic education system.
Sanele Zondo of the IFP, I'd like you to weigh in on this. I think we have a thread here of decolonized education. Next year we will actually mark the 10th anniversary year at UCT of the Rhodes Must Fall movement. I'd like you as an IFP leader to talk about what does decolonized education, Africanized centered education mean to you as a young leader?
No, it's funny when we see leaders turn in terms of their debate, in terms of their points. You have to align your debate. First of all, you hear AFF talking about nationalization of everything. But if you go to their leaders, their dependents are studying in boarding schools. You know, if you are saying that you want to nationalize things, you must start by showing it. You walk the talk. Don't say something else when you are at work, but practice something different when you're at home. You know, you come to Rise Mzansi. I'm just laughing when my comrade here is speaking, because Rise Mzansi has been funded by Rebecca Oppenheimer, and they come here and they tell us that the education need to be some sort of Africanism or something. But at the end of the day, we are here talking about the future of this country. I made a point of federalism, and when you are telling people that they have to know their history, they have to know their background to understand where they want to take this country forward to, make sure that the regulations and policies are allowing them to do so. And that is federalism. That is the form of government that will bring us to that aspect.
I'm going to give Akolele time to respond. I'll give Inam a chance to respond. Sandile inferred that EFF leaders' children go to public schools. And I'll tie this into a question which I want all of our panelists to answer yes or no, and maybe you could do a short qualification. Should public representatives be compelled to send their children to public educational institutions?
To respond, it's not the EFF government that has failed the education system. It's the ANC government. So that is why even with the EFF manifesto, we are saying that there must be one standard education system. So we are saying that there mustn't be an IEB versus a NSC situation. There must just be one standard education system. So in that instance, then we wouldn't even have to answer that question. And then just back to the roads must fall thing. So the spatial makeup and the pedagogy of this country teaches young people to undermine, if not hate, their being. Nothing in our environment or in our schools reminds one that they are African or that they are in Africa. So it couldn't be correct that the statue of a colonialist, Cecil John Rhodes, stood tall in the middle of a university in Africa in 2015. So in the main, that is what the Rhodes Must Fall generation was calling for, the fall of Rhodes in the University of Cape Town.
Akolele, should public representatives be compelled to send their children to public education institutions?
Yes, they must, and that will ensure that they make sure that those public institutions work for everyone. When we talk about bridging, particularly in the Western Cape, we talk about equality, and for us to get to equality, we must deal with equity and making sure that we fix what has been neglected for the past 15 years in this province and for the past 30 years in the country.
Lucian Davids of the ANC.
Thank you, Lester. I do agree, that our public reps should, send their kids to public schools. I'm actually a bit perturbed by our EFF Mafaita that's running away from the question because, since we have this democracy, we have choice. And instead of going for public, they choose private. So, you don't have to be, run away from the question. You had the choice and they still chose private when they could do public, while jabbing at the ANC to say that, if it was a unitary thing, then,
Before I get Inam to respond, Zandile, your thoughts on this question?
I think public reps dependent should go to public schools. It's cheating when you're saying you are making laws for public schools, but at the same time you are taking your child to private schools, which means you don't trust the laws and policies that you are making. You won't put feelings, you won't put emotions in the laws that you are making if you know that those laws won't work in your child.
The IFP in its manifesto also speaks to an open free market system. Free market system comes with the freedom of choice. So if you're saying that public representatives must be compelled, does that not go contradictory to a free market system that the IFP endorses?
No, the context, free market system and the freedom of choice. Take it from SGPs. The SGP school governing body complies the requirement to be the SGP. You should have a child in that school, so that whatever you do, you'll know that will affect your child and the future of your child. That must be something that may be applied. You can't make laws and take it for South Africa and take your child to study abroad.
Sandile, Gillian, your response for this round?
I think we need to give people the option of having better public schools so that they can choose to send their kids to those schools. In the Western Cape, we've got a wonderful tool called the Schools Evaluation Authority. So if the leader of the EFF would like to find a decent public school, you can go and look at the reports on all the public schools in the Western Cape and see how the Schools Evaluation Authority has ranked those schools, and you might find that there's quality education, not just in private schools, but in many public schools. So, Lester, the short answer is, if you want us to trust you, you have to put skin in the game. And I think that's important when it comes to public services, because if we all work towards building proper public services like education, like healthcare, it should be a no-brainer that becomes an option for everybody.
What is a debate on an election, which we're focusing on youth and education? We've asked representatives of student bodies here at UCT to be part of our panel and to ask questions to our panelists here. Student politics is party politically aligned. So here with us is the SRC president, Hlamulo Kurumbi, who is a member of the EFF. We have the DA student organization's Tom Wells. We have also invited Sasco, aligned to the ANC. They haven't arrived, but I ask you and I invite you, Hlamulo, not to just put on a party political hat, but as a young person in South Africa. What are your questions to our panelists here?
So I want to understand from each political party what is their take on the issue of accommodation, which all institution faces. Each and every year you see students sleeping on halls, students sleeping outside, and how are they going to resolve it? What is the practical solution which they think it will be best for them? Then I think the second question to me, it will go specifically to the representative of ANC. I was listening not so long talking about the education system, specifically on the basic education, which I want to understand how are they thinking to resolve the issue of having two types of education, IEB and NEC, which IEB is for those who can afford, those who are rich or semi-rich, and NEC is for us who can't afford or come from a disadvantaged background. And why for over 30 years they still allow such? Because to us it reflects as if there is still a Bantu education for those who can afford and those who can't. I think those are the two questions. Thank you.
Lucian Davids, because the question was directly posed to you, the second part, I'll have you start and we'll go around the table here.
From our side as the ANC, we recognize that there's a lot more work that needs to be done, a lot more engagements that needs to come from communities and societies to make sure that we are moving forward together as a country in terms of, still addressing the challenges that we do have. I think more so in our attempt to respond to the issue of the two educational systems that exist, I definitely still think that there's room for us, to really address the matter, as that question was not brought onto the table yet. So I'm not going to answer anything that I know that I won't do justice on. But what I'm saying 100% from our side is that we as the ANC invite those engagements to make sure that we do have an inclusive and unitary educational system, so as not exclude, because this is a democracy that we fought for, and it requires us all as people of this country to have a stake in that transformation we wish to see.
Aktolile?
Fixing leadership and management in terms of the Department of Higher Education. Second is that we need to improve on intergovernmental relations and cooperative governance, because a university doesn't exist on its own. It exists in a province, it exists amongst other departments. And so this is a housing issue. Therefore, you have to bring in the Department of Human Settlements to work with the Department of Higher Education. It gets us to talk about public land that's available so that we build more housing and accommodation for students in the province and across South Africa.
Inam from the EFF.
Okay, yeah. So, the accommodation question is directly linked to the land question, and also landlessness, displacement, and dispossession. So, when we say that we need the land and also we need to have state capacity, it's for that reason, so that we can provide accommodation through state-owned buildings and parcels of land. So, as we are saying, as the EFF, basically, we would be able to provide accommodation to students through our state-owned buildings, and also this will also prevent the monopoly of private accommodation that you find in and around institutions of higher learning.
Gillian Bosman of the Democratic Alliance.
We have to address the lack of transparency in the student housing infrastructure program and how that funding model works. We need to address the inconsistent data that we have on student accommodation and what is available at universities and what is available in the private sector, because we know the private sector is capitalizing on the issues that young people are having. We also need to address some of those allegations of price collusion within how student accommodation subsidies are provided to private sector developers. And then also maybe one of the most important things is we need the national government to look at a market-related setting, because the blanket accommodation fee cap on student accommodation is part of the problem, because what something costs close to UCT versus what it costs in Bellville at CPUT and what it costs in Stellenbosch is very different.
Sanele Zondi of the IFP.
No, thanks. I think first and for all, the public-private partnership need to be fostered so that we will bridge the gap between the private and public institutions. You know, as the IFP believe that whenever you want to bridge that gap, you need to cooperate and work together and to transform that. For student accommodation, I think we've been talking about this thing for the longest time in the portfolio, to say you can't have a blanket approach, because there are cases whereby you find that the state of the student accommodation does not tally with the cap that the department has put in place. So what must be done? Firstly, we must adhere to the requirement of the student accommodation from the private owners. That first thing. Second thing, the corruption. You know, the ruling party is rotten. That is the fact that we cannot shy away. We have private accommodations which are costing into a maximum cap, because the admin or management has a say or are getting some monies from those owners of that private accommodation. So I think the factor of a ruling party need to be rooted out, because the corruption comes with them. Then we'll have proper structures that are proper managed and doing justice to our students.
Let's take another question from the floor. Tom Vowles, you represent the DAS, or the DA Students Organization. What is your question for all our panelists?
I actually have a question for the ANC representative, Lucian, and it relates to NFSAS. If you were to walk just 100 meters away from where we are now to the SRC offices, it's very likely that you'll find a handful of students there waiting to speak to SRC members because their NFSAS funding got cut suddenly. They're still waiting for a response. They're facing financial exclusion, not based on academic performance, but purely because of maladministration, lack of funding. And that's made a lot worse by the 10% budget cut to NFSAS this year, which resulted in 87,000 eligible students losing funding. And like Lester mentioned earlier, just one of many budget cuts to basic education, healthcare, policing. And if we're going to get to the core of why these budgets are being cut, it's to fund a bloated public sector, overstaffed SOEs and an overstaffed public sector. So if you were to walk with me after this debate in your ANC t-shirt to speak to those students, how would you justify that to them? How would you justify stripping their right to tertiary education or their access to a tertiary education to fund a bloated public sector? Thanks.
Lucian Davids of the ANC.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Look, the way that the question is structured seems as if we are deliberately not wanting to fund students. You'd understand that since we inherited the democracy, we have been challenged with the mud of economic backlogs. Especially because of the issue that during the apartheid phase in the 1980s, this government, the apartheid government, went into a spree of privatizations and taking debts from world institutions. Hence, you'd find that during the term or the tenure of President Thabo Mbeki, we had to change policy in order to expand the economy. Which is now the issue of us resulting with having to go on to what is called this program of austerity to make sure that we are paying off that budget deficit at least, or making sure that we are trying to take care of the economy in that way. Hence, you find that there's these budget cuts because we're trying to make sure that we are managing the health of the economy, because all of the programs that we're trying to fund, and you'd understand that the ANC has institutionalized a lot of social programs within this country, and unfortunately it is a big burden towards the citizens within this country. And from my side, my advice, or my word of speaking, would obviously be like, see, we are students at this institution, many of us are struggling. But for ourselves, is we need to have that dialogue, that inclusive dialogue from all sectors of the society, to make sure that we get an appropriate type of a way of addressing the issue of student services.
I'm going to bring into this conversation Daniel Den Hollander, is a clinical psychologist, is an executive council member of Psychology South Africa, recently writing an opinion piece called "Listen to the Voices of the Youth. We don't want your corruption and your divisions. We want our Ubuntu back." If you can sum up your piece, but also direct it as a question to our panel here, Daniel, what's your thoughts on the state of the youth and education in South Africa?
I recently graduated to not being a youth a week ago or a month ago when I turned 40. But my position is I am a clinical psychologist who works in the Athlone area and serve with youth in Lansdowne, Bonteheuwel, Hanover Park, Newfield. And as we're sitting here as 5 people, if I conclude myself 6 and Lester 7, we're also sitting here as elders. And elders have a very important responsibility within the African community. And I'm thinking, as we're sitting here, have we done what we are supposed to do? Have we done what comes back to our roots, especially the 5 of you who represents the most influential people, the most influential personnel to help this generation? Let me tell you something about this generation. We are so fortunate to have such a brilliant generation coming through who are able to change the things that Biko and Sobukwe, we want to talk about decolonization. We not once mentioned Sobukwe and Biko, the fathers of our decolonization. And we don't hear it at all. And I want to say something because I don't see the elders of our country fulfilling the mandate that Biko and Sobukwe have asked us in 70s. We have become the children of Biko. We have realized that the only vehicle for change is ourselves. Through social media, we are coming to ourselves. Through the Women's March, Rose Must Fall, we have pumped back energy into our empty shells. Through education and learnerships, this is our demand to you.
Daniel, can I ask you
this is a spiritual revolution.
Your question, we're running out of time. What would be your question to leave our panelists with?
We want our Ubuntu back, and you are busy dividing us. How are you, as 5 representatives, going to give us our Ubuntu back?
Let's start with Akolele, and we'll go around this way. Akolele, Inam, Lucian, Gillian, and then Sanele. After this elections, after the 29th of May, you're all young leaders in this country running for representative membership of our legislatures and our National Assembly. How do we unite the South African youth after this election?
Thank you, Lester. So that's why it was important for us to talk about bringing an African lens into our education system, in terms of our basic education system, so that we can understand, young people can understand what it means to be Ubuntu. But again, yesterday I launched the Western Cape Plan, and it's called the Bridge Plan. Because there are divides in the Western Cape. There are racial divides, there are class divides, there are spatial divides, and we need to deal with those. Without having us to deal with those, we're not going to go to Ubuntu.
Inam?
So everything about the EFF is about restoring the dignity of our people. So the issue of the land question remains at the core of what we speak about and our principles, because when you have land and means of production, you're able to create jobs, you're able to produce shelter, and you're also able to develop the country's infrastructure for the betterment of our people and the country's economy. So everything that the EFF stands for is actually for the betterment of our people, and we're not far from what Sobukwe speaks about and also Biko speaks about.
Running
It's
out of
embedded
time.
in our
Lucian, you have 30 seconds, unfortunately. 30 seconds.
Thanks, Lester. The ANC has always been inclusive, democratic, non-sexist, non-racial, and we will always live to, hold close to those aspirations. The ANC Youth League has also been helping the ANC reach more sectors, in terms of doing church visits, having walkabouts and blitzings, making sure we reach the people and reconnect with them, because the message has always been that we are one people, we are African.
Gillian Bosman, as quickly as possible.
Lester, what we want to do as the Democratic Alliance is to strengthen communities, develop communities through collaboration with government, the private sector and civil society to enable community wellness, creating a safer environment, ensuring that jobs are created in our communities, because we know nothing stops a bullet like a job. That's how we improve South Africa.
Final word from the IFP, Zanele Zondo.
I think we need to come to a reality to say that when you go to KwaZulu-Natal, you will find that people there, they have land under the Ngoyama Trust Act, and the fact of the matter in that is that Prince Buthelezi transferred the land from the state land in 1994 to Ngoyama Trust Board, So the fact is that the government should start by transferring the state land to the people before we're talking about the AFF and the land.
That's all we have time for, Zanele Zondo. Really appreciate your time. That's our show.